Welcome to The Explainer. I'm absolutely pumped to have you with us today because we're jumping right into an in-depth look at the world's largest, and honestly, probably the most complex nation on Earth, Russia. We're going to peel back the layers of a place where you've got impenetrable snow-capped mountains on one side and forests so massive that their depths are literally still unmeasured. From the sheer, staggering geography all the way down to the practical, day-to-day realities of studying and living there right now, we've distilled exactly what you need to know. Let's get into it.
Okay, so let's wrap our heads around this mind-bending reality. What is it actually like to live in a country that spans 11 time zones? Think about that for a second. When someone in Western Russia is just waking up at 9 a.m., pouring their morning coffee, a guy way out east in Siberia is looking at his watch, seeing 8 p.m. and brushing his teeth for bed. A live national address by the president is being watched by people starting their day and people ending their night, all within the exact same borders. Wild, right?
To keep things structured, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the unbelievable scale of Russia, its turbulent history, the culture, food, and people. Then we'll explore the grand cities, and finally, look at the real-world opportunities for South Asians.
Starting with Part 1, the scale of Russia, a true land of extremes.
The numbers here are just, well, they're staggering. We're talking a total land mass of 17.1 million square kilometers. That is a solid 11% of the entire Earth's land mass. To put that into perspective for you, you could fit Pakistan into Russia 21 times. You could drop India in there 5 or 6 times over. It's so enormous that it touches 14 different countries and 3 oceans. But here's the really fascinating contradiction. Despite all that space, the population is only 144.4 million. That's significantly less than Pakistan's 250 million. So what does that mean? It means, on average, there are only about 8 to 9 people per square kilometer. Out in Siberia, you can travel for hundreds of miles and find absolutely nothing but endless trees, ice, and just profound, absolute silence.
Moving on to Part 2, a turbulent history of empires and revolutions. We can trace the nation's roots way back to the 9th century with the founding of Kiev Rus. Fast forward a bit through the era of the Tsars, where leaders like Peter the Great built it into a massive European empire, and then boom, we hit the earth-shattering Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. That brought down the Tsars and gave rise to the Soviet Union. Finally, we reached 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed and fractured into 15 distinct nations, leaving Russia as the largest piece of the puzzle. It's a landscape of constant, monumental transformation.
But you really can't grasp modern Russia without acknowledging the staggering human cost of its past. During World War II, out of an estimated 70 to 80 million global deaths, the Soviet Union suffered over 27 million casualties. Let that sink in. They bore more than a third of the entire global death toll. It's an almost unfathomable sacrifice, and it is still commemorated passionately today. Almost every single household has a picture of a lost relative, and that history really shapes the resilient character of the nation today.
All right, Part 3, culture, food, and people, going way beyond the stereotypes.
So the reality here beautifully busts the whole monolith myth. While people often just associate Russia with Orthodox Christianity, roughly 10 to 15% of the population, that's 15 to 20 million people, are Muslim. In regions like Tatarstan, Chechnya, and Dagestan, Muslims are actually the clear majority. If you walk around Moscow today, you'll see several massive grand mosques, including the stunning Moscow Cathedral Mosque, serving a super vibrant and diverse community. And you can absolutely taste this diversity in the food. Sure, you have borscht, that famous beetroot soup, and pelmeni, those really hearty meat dumplings. But thanks to that deep Tatar influence, especially in places like Kazan, you get dishes that feel wonderfully familiar to a South Asian palate. Take the ekpuchmak, for instance. It's a meat-filled triangular pastry that looks and tastes remarkably like a samosa. Or chak-chak, a sweet, honey-soaked treat that fits perfectly with our love for rich desserts.
Now, when we talk about culture, I've got to mention the banya. This is the traditional Russian steam bath, and it perfectly captures just how robust these people are. Picture this. You sit in an intensely hot, steamy room until you can barely take the heat anymore. And then, in the dead of winter, you bolt outside and literally roll around in the snow or jump straight into freezing cold water. They absolutely swear by it for good health, and honestly, it's quite the rush.
Which brings us to Part 4, exploring the grand cities, where history meets modernity.
Let's kick off our virtual tour right in the heart of it all, Moscow. You step out and immediately hit Red Square, flanked by the massive red walls of the Kremlin and those incredibly colorful, iconic onion domes of the 16th century St. Basil's Cathedral. Right nearby is Lenin's mausoleum, where the founder of the Soviet Union has actually laid preserved in a glass coffin for a century. But honestly, the biggest surprise is underground. Moscow's metro stations are quite literally underground palaces. They were built during the Soviet era with marble floors, mosaics, and giant chandeliers, completely designed to make everyday workers feel like absolute royalty on their commute home.
Now contrast that vibe with St. Petersburg. This city was built by Peter the Great specifically to look like a modern European capital, complete with Amsterdam-style canals. It is famous for its white nights. Because the city sits so far north, during June, the sun barely even dips below the horizon. You can go for a walk at 2 a.m. and it looks like early evening. It creates this magical, surreal atmosphere where the whole city just stays up and celebrates with music and festivals all night long.
But listen, we can't talk about Russian extremes without mentioning this crazy number, minus 71 degrees Celsius. That's the record-breaking low recorded in Omyakan, deep in Siberia. It is the coldest inhabited place on Earth. It is so freezing there that if you step outside, your eyelashes instantly turn to ice. People have to leave their cars running constantly, because if you turn the engine off, it will literally freeze solid. They even have to light a fire on the ground before digging a grave, just to thaw the permafrost. No way around it, that is intense.
And that perfectly illustrates the sheer unpredictability of Russia. Just look at these rapid-fire facts. Lake Baikal in Siberia? It's so deep it holds 20% of the world's fresh, unfrozen surface water. That is enough to supply all of humanity for 5 years. Also, right after the USSR collapsed, the economy was so chaotic that workers were sometimes literally paid in vodka. It became an actual currency. Oh, and those ubiquitous dash cams you see in crazy internet videos? Totally necessary for insurance because of the wild traffic. And get this, in the Bering Strait, there are 2 islands, one Russian, one American, and they are separated by just 4 kilometers. You can almost swim it. Finally, Part 5, Opportunities for South Asians, covering education, work, and travel.
Right now, a huge draw is education, especially for medical students. There are currently roughly 5,000 to 7,000 Pakistani and numerous Indian students studying in Russia, and the reason is simple: the cost. Getting the high-quality MBBS degree from a world-renowned Russian university will set you back about 30 to 50 lakh rupees total. When you compare that to the skyrocketing costs of private medical colleges back home in South Asia, it is a massive game changer and a highly viable option for aspiring doctors. But what's the day-to-day reality actually like? Well, the biggest hurdle, for sure, is the language barrier. Very little English is spoken, especially outside of Moscow, so learning Russian is absolutely mandatory. On the job front, you're looking at growing opportunities in IT, construction, and trade. For living costs, Moscow is an expensive global hub. You might pay $500 to $700 a month just to rent a room. But head to other cities, and that drops to like $200 or $300. The best part? Groceries are super cheap, and you can easily find halal food and restaurants in major cities like Moscow and Kazan.
Now, if you are planning a trip, here is a crucial pro tip you cannot ignore: the strict 5-day registration rule. If you arrive in Russia and stay for more than 5 days, you are legally required to register your presence with the local police. If you're at a hotel, they usually just handle the paperwork for you. But if you're crashing with friends or running an apartment, you have got to make sure this gets done. Otherwise, you're looking at some seriously hefty fines when you try to leave the country. Zooming out to the big picture, the economic landscape is shifting rapidly. With recent global events and Western sanctions, Russia has really had to pivot its economy. Because of that, we're seeing heavily strengthened economic and diplomatic ties with South Asia. Russia is directing massive volumes of its oil and natural gas trade toward nations like India and Pakistan, boosting bilateral trade and kicking off huge energy pipeline projects. It's a pragmatic shift, and it is actively reshaping global trade as we speak.
And that brings us to the end of today's Explainer. From a colossal land spanning 11 time zones with minus 71-degree winters to everyday commutes in literal underground palaces and students crossing continents just to study, the scale and the contradictions here are just immense. So what surprised you the most about all this? Take a moment to reflect on that, drop your thoughts, and keep that curiosity alive until our next deep dive.